Hi everyone, and welcome to this little extra crime and punishment story. In this extra video I am covering the Joe the Quilter update on his sadly unsolved murder story that I did promise I would do quite some time ago. Now, I did write this story quite a while ago, however I lost all of my notes, so pretty much have had to rewrite it again. I hope you will find it interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. And I would just like to add, as I always do now, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. Having read the book that I mentioned in the original video, I am now covering some of the details that were mentioned in it. I will hopefully leave a link to the book in the description below for anyone else who would like to read it. However, I must point out that I have never added a link before, so I might not be able to do it. The book does not just cover the murder story, but also a lot of other historical information from the era when Joe was alive. I hope you will enjoy this video about my thoughts on the book. Now, for anyone who hasn't watched the original video, then I would suggest that you do watch that before watching this, as I only do a very brief recap and you do need to know the story before you watch this. And my video about Joe the Quilter can be found in the Crime and Punishment playlist on my channel. And for everyone else who can remember the story, here is a very quick recap of the main details. The body of Joseph Headley, also known as Joe the Quilter, was found in his locked cottage known as Homer's House on Homer's Lane in Warden near Hexham in January of 1826. There had only been two people who had seen him just prior to his death, and they were William Herdman and Mrs. Biggs. Although a man by the name of Mr. Smith had passed the cottage a little later on the night of the crime, he had not actually seen Joe. The police did investigate to the best of their ability based on the evidence they had to work with some people being arrested for the crime, but they were all later released and the police were never able to find the guilty party. Several people did confess to the murder in later years, but none were ever proven to be the person or persons responsible for the terrible murder of Joe the Quilter, so the crime remained unsolved. The book that I referred to in the original video, and the one that I am taking the details from for this video, is called A Horrid Deed, The Life and Death of Joe the Quilter, and is written by Robert N. Smith. The book, as earlier mentioned, covers many other aspects of Joe's life, going into a lot more detail than I did in the original or would do in this video, and it also covers some of the history of the time period when Joe was alive, as I said before. It also goes on to give the author's own thoughts on who he believed was the best suspect in the murder case, based on their extensive research into the story, and it is that part that I am really going to talk about in this video. So I will break it down into sections along with my thoughts and opinions on each section. It was said that on the night of the crime, no witnesses came forward to say they had noticed any strangers in the area. However, it is also safe to say that no one came forward to say they had seen any of the people who had been known to be in the area that night. So I believe that if William, Mrs. Biggs and Mr. Smith could pass without being seen, then surely so could a stranger. It is also suggested that no one noticed lots of extra footprints around the cottage and the surrounding area during the days following the murder. But I have to say that I would not have imagined they would have noticed anything extra or strange, as several people had passed and been in and out of the cottage, so it would have been hard to spot anything different to normal. And it also snowed between the time of the murder and Joe being found, so I would assume that a lot of the footprints would have been hidden by the snowfall. So for people passing, surely it would have been seeing no footprints in the fresh snow that would have been more noticeable and strange, leading people to realise that Joe had not been outside. The clogs or shoes that were found some distance away from the cottage had been suggested as proof that Joe had tried to escape but had been dragged back, leaving his shoes behind. However, it seems there were no signs of a struggle around the area where the shoes were found, and I could not find any information saying that Joe was found without shoes on, or that no shoes had been found in his cottage. But perhaps I missed that in the book or in the old newspaper articles, but I honestly don't think that I did. Moving on to the hair and blood found in the doorway of the cottage. It was suggested originally that this came from Joe during the attack, but other suggestions from the book are that the blood came from a chicken that had been killed for Joe's Christmas dinner. The book also suggests that if Joe had been carried back into the cottage from his alleged attempt to escape, he would have been at a lower height than the top of the door frame, so his head would not have hit it. Now, I have to say that I do agree with this last part. However, I also have to say that the blood and hair on the door could easily still have been Joe's, especially if the attack had begun at the doorway and not inside the cottage. I'm not quite sure what to think about the chicken story. It may have been hung there after it was killed, explaining the blood, but that does not explain the hair in the blood. It was suggested in a way that made me think a lot of hair was found, not just one or two strands. A few strands could have been explained as just the odd hair being lost as Joe came in and out of the cottage on a normal daily basis. But to mention it sounds to me more like it was a clump of hair that was found. And a local farmhand had also passed the cottage the day after the murder, and he noticed blood on the door, but he didn't really think much of it. But this makes me wonder if the blood, which was supposed to be from a chicken killed on or before Christmas Day, was still clearly noticed, then would it really have been noticed some 2 weeks later? I somehow don't think it would. I am sure that blood changes colour over time. So that makes me feel that the blood on the door must have been something much more recent than something that happened at Christmas time. The book then goes on to discuss the various escape routes from the cottage for the person or persons who had committed the crime. But I have to admit that I don't know the area well enough to really explain this part or give my thoughts or opinions on it. So if you want to know about this bit, then I'm afraid that you really will need to read the book. Moving on now to Joe's front door. It is mentioned that Joe locked his door on the outside in a certain way whenever he went out. And when the concerned neighbours broke in on the day his body was found, it had been fastened correctly. However, it also has to be said that many people must have known about this and possibly known how to do it in the same way that Joe did it. A lodger had recently stopped with Joe, so he would have surely known how to lock the door, and perhaps some friends and neighbours may have also known. And of course, can we really be sure that it was locked exactly as Joe would have done it? But people must have known, as I say, how it was locked, as how else would they have been able to say that it had been locked correctly when they broke in. Next is the suggestion that early January does not seem like a time when someone would have come to the area for the purpose of robbing Joe the Quilter, as his cottage was very isolated and he did not look like the home of someone who had money. But, of course, we have to look here at the idea that someone may have been passing the area and just decided to try their luck. For want of a better way to describe it, just a chance robbery. And someone even less well off than Joe may have still found something worth stealing. Or it may even be the possibility that someone believed Joe did have money and they did come on purpose at what they hoped would be a quiet time with less people around. The book then suggests that there was not enough room in the cottage for 3 people to struggle without disturbing a lot more of the items in the room, such as the plates on the table, etc., which were not broken, thus suggesting that there was only one attacker. Now, the original theory from the police and newspapers at the time was that there had been more than one attacker, suggesting that there had been 2. Now, I look at that and think that there may have been 2 people present, but one may have not taken part in the attack inside the cottage, or may have even been outside keeping a lookout. We now come to the part in the book where it is suggested that William Herdman is the prime suspect for the murder, as he had the best escape route, was known in the area, so would not have seemed out of place near the cottage, and that he also owned a knife like the one used in the attack. It is surmised that after arriving at Joe's cottage, William had become angry with him for some unknown reason, and rather than leaving when he said that he had still been there when Mrs. Biggs knocked on the door at 7 p.m. Mrs. Biggs was the lady who had been looking for directions to Four Stones. It is suggested that to avoid being seen, William followed behind Joe to the front door and then quickly hid himself inside the dark second room. The entrance to that room was near to the front door, and so when Mrs. Biggs stepped inside, she would have believed the cottage to be empty. And she did swear to the cottage being empty apart from Joe when she went inside when she was interviewed after the crime. And then it was suggested that after she had left with her directions to Four Stones, William had grabbed the garden hoe, and as Joe walked into the dark room to see where he had gone, William swung the hoe and hit Joe hard on the head with it, knocking him back into the living room, and he then went on to stab Joe over 40 times before dragging his body back into the dark room and leaving him on the floor to die. William, it is then suggested, went on to ransack the cottage, smashing the clock and slashing at the bedclothes and breaking open boxes, though some items he did not touch. And after this he wiped his blood-stained knife on a towel, and then suddenly realising what he had done, grabbed his coat and hat, opened the front door, and checking carefully to see no one was around, left, locking the door, using Joe's special fastening, and then headed home, washing his hands and face in the weir that he had to cross to reach his home. We then come to the suggestion from the book that the following morning William was feeling very guilty about what he had done, but no one had come to his door about the murder, so he went about his usual routine of passing the cottage on his way to work, and finding the cottage all quiet, it is then surmised that William thought about reporting the murder, but realised that he would then have to explain why he had entered the house if nothing seemed to be wrong. He did not do that, so he instead then went back into the cottage, removed Joe's shoes and placed them a little distance away from the cottage in the hope that someone would notice them and find it strange and maybe wonder if Joe was okay, and he then continued on to work, later mentioning seeing the shoes to his colleague at the paper mill, who suggested that they may have been left out for someone less fortunate to take. Then on his way home that night, all was still quiet, and it was suggested that William checked again the following day, even though he was not at work and would not usually pass that way, and he still found everything quiet. Now, part of this I know was true. William did indeed mention the shoes clogs at work, and the colleague did suggest that they were maybe his old ones left out for someone to take. The rest, of course, though, is just what the author thinks might have happened. But I have to ask, would William really have risked going in and out of the cottage again in daylight when he could have been seen just to move some shoes? And would he have really gone back on a day when he would not normally pass, as again he could have been seen, and someone, after Joe's body had been found, if asked, may have thought this was suspicious? Some of the questions the book throws up about William are: why did he not call in to see Joe after Tuesday night? Why had he not noticed a lack of smoke coming from the chimney? And why had he not seen the blood on the cottage door? Now, I would suggest that he had perhaps not called in at first as he thought Joe was not home. Remember, it was said his door was locked from the outside, making it seem that he was not in, and he may not have wondered about smoke, as thinking Joe was out assumed his fire was not lit. And as for the cottage door and not seeing the blood, well, perhaps he never really got close enough to the door to spot this. And William, if innocent, would have seen nothing wrong with the cottage when he passed. The door locked, so Joe was out, and on passing on the way home he may have just assumed Joe was either still not home or had been home and back out again. Surely with the door locked from the outside, most people would have assumed the same thing, and we obviously can't be sure that he went back to look at the cottage on the day he was not at work. He may truly have not passed again until the following day when he was back to work. William was, of course, questioned by the police at the time, but was found to be without motive and also seen as someone who was somewhat simple and even termed as an imbecile, and not seen as being a person who would have committed such a terrible crime. He never confessed to the crime, and he does not seem to have behaved differently afterwards either. And it was not said that the knife, although similar to the one that may have been used in the attack, was never suggested to have been the definite knife that was used in the attack. And it seems to me that with all the rewards that were offered to solve the murder, and all of the people in the area looking to try and find out who did it, William, if guilty, would have been unnerved by this surely and confessed, or at the very least it may have made him act in a suspicious manner, saying strange things that would have made people wonder if he was hiding something. So how do I feel about the book suggesting the crime is solved in theory and that William was the murderer? Well, personally I think some good points were made and some information was shared that I previously did not know, and it is also very well researched, but I think the main parts about what William did when he went to visit Joe on that Tuesday night are just speculation and facts, just as the information about what he may have done on the following couple of days is also just speculation. And I feel that with regards to what William did, Joe would have wondered why William followed him to the door when Mrs. Biggs arrived, and he may have even asked him why he was hiding when she was inside the cottage, if, of course, William had done this, as the book suggested, and this would have made Mrs. Biggs realise that William was in there because Joe was talking to somebody. And I also think that Mrs. Biggs would have noticed 2 chairs by the fire, William's coat, or maybe even a table set for 2 people, and would surely have mentioned this when she was questioned later. The stolen items were never found, although I am aware that they were only thought to be stolen. So did William hide them or throw them away? And if he had done all of the other things as well as this that the book suggested, like moving the shoes, etc., then this would then suggest that he had a much sharper mind than he was given credit for. I personally do still feel it was a stranger who killed Joe, and that it possibly was 2 people. I think in all honesty it will be a case that will never truly be solved and will remain a mystery forevermore. But do please let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below, and if you do read the book, which obviously has a lot more detail in it than this video, then do please let me know what you think of it. I in no way think the book is bad. I think the author has done the same as I have done here, looked at the evidence and tried to work the story out in their own mind. It's just simply my opinion is somewhat different to his. However, it is still a very good book and well worth a read, and it all helps to keep the video, to keep the memory, of Joe the Quilter alive. I do hope that you have enjoyed this extra little video, which is totally just my thoughts and opinions on the case based on the details in the book, and I do hope that you have found it interesting. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.